chers collègues, Mike Morrice, député de Kitchener-Centre, et moi-même, Elizabeth May, nous sommes ici pour expliquer notre vote cet après-midi. We are voting for the block motion for a royal proclamation. We had supported this private member's bill, projet de loi éminent de députés, avant, et maintenant, nous restons en faveur. But we really want to stress that we think there is room in the fiscal framework to make this work without expanding debt. And we are troubled by, and are keenly aware of, as I've raised in debate on this issue, the intergenerational fairness issue and whether we can look at a budget and say it speaks to intergenerational fairness. For that to occur, we need to identify where the money comes from, to ensure that the addition to pension benefits is covered, and moreover, that the fiscal framework overall will improve intergenerational fairness. So I'll leave Mike to speak to the key details, but let's just say that we know that between fossil fuel subsidies and an excess profit tax on fossil fuels, we can do two things at once for intergenerational fairness. We can improve revenues available to the Government of Canada for things people need, and at the same time, we can improve the likelihood that the next generation will have a survivable future.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. Just to add that as Greens, we agree with the bloc that when we look at the 18 billion plus in fossil fuel subsidies, that this government continues to subsidize the fossil fuel industry at that rate, and look at the 3 billion per year that this would require, that there is plenty of room in the fiscal framework, not only to top up OAS by 10% and increase the GIS threshold from 5,000 to 6,500, but to do more and go further when it comes to the housing crisis, when it comes to addressing legislated poverty for people with disabilities and bringing about a fully funded Canada Disability Benefit. We can do more to fill in the social safety net for seniors and for others across the country if we were to be more honest about where the tens of billions are truly going, and that's in the pockets of big oil. It's one of the reasons why we support this motion. I'll pass it back to Elizabeth for any questions the folks might have.
Je veux souligner seulement que c'est vraiment possible d'avoir ce projet de loi éminent de députés et en même temps améliorer la situation fiscale, parce que nous restons comme un pays avec les grandes subventions vers l'énergie fossile et aussi pour leur profit sans impôt. So we want to see real change in addressing the climate crisis for the next generation and improve the affordability crisis for young people as we address the affordability crisis for seniors.
You were speaking about fairness. So what if this new program was to be put on the debt, a more deficit? Would that be...
Ce n'est pas égal. Il reste clair, et je suis absolument d'accord avec les rapports et les études du professeur Paul Kershaw de l'Université de Colombie-Britannique dans le groupe Generation Squeeze, que nous sommes maintenant dans une situation où il y a une inégalité, un grand écart entre la situation pour nos jeunes et nos aînés. We don't want to just see more money available to people like me who are seniors, when we know that it's young people who are struggling and who could never see themselves owning a home, having a life. But at the same time, I was at a Seniors for Climate Action rally yesterday in Victoria, where we were talking about the reality of what's really unfair intergenerationally. It's what Greta Thunberg said.
But then why do you agree with it?
Because I see it every day that seniors are also struggling. I deal with constituents who tell me they're one step away from sleeping in their car. We need both, and we can afford both, and we want to make that point very clearly.
Well, wouldn't a means-tested benefit be better? Because this generation of seniors is one of the wealthiest in Canadian history. Wouldn't a means-tested, like doing it through the GIS rather than the OAS, be a better way of doing it?
That's partly what's there.
Well, what we want to see also, of course, there is a taxation system that taxes back where people are really and truly not in need. That's why we prefer a guaranteed livable income that's not means tested so that no one lives in poverty in this country. But these are steps in that direction. We've supported it before, and it is at a point now where amendments to that, perhaps the pressure we're applying today, can assist the Liberal government and the opposition parties in coming up with some modifications. But what this motion is very clear. It's a royal proclamation. And it's not a zero-sum game. That's our main point. This is not a question of this group wins, so younger Canadians lose. That is not necessary, and that's not why we're voting the way we're voting.
And just for the clarity, there is a portion of C319 which does raise the GIS threshold from 5,000 to 6,500. The PBO tells us that 500 million of this is going to go to the lowest income seniors across the country. As Greens, we weren't presented with the opportunity to it's whether we support what's being proposed or not. We support it on balance, recognizing that the funds are coming from big oil specifically. That's where we could be investing in folks with disabilities, in young people, in housing, and seniors.
Do you think a fall election is more likely now?
Oh, we have a polls. Who knows? The honest answer. Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. The question is a fall election more likely? I don't think the fall election is at all likely. We have elections right now in British Columbia, New Brunswick, and Saskatchewan, and it would be undercutting democracy at the level of other governments. And I can tell you, my constituents, who all are British Columbians, do not want to see a federal fall election while we're choosing the next government of BC and seeing a really vigorous debate happening across the hustings. Same thing for New Brunswick, same thing for Saskatchewan. There are strong pressures that mitigate against a fall election.
Is the situation in Parliament, though, is the situation untenable?
No, the situation is tenable. The difficulty is that all of us must behave ourselves much better. And so I call on Mr. Poilievre, Mr. Singh, their whips, to do whatever they can to keep the temperature down and give the Speaker the respect he deserves in order to keep order in the House.
Do you really think that's going to happen?
I absolutely believe it can happen. It should happen. And therefore, I think with pressure from Canadians who would like to see their parliamentarians behave in ways that don't remind them of brawls in the schoolyard grounds, perhaps we can get ourselves to behave. And I do think that can happen, and I do think it will happen. We have work to do.
But who's misbehaving the most?
We'll leave you to decide what can happen. As Greens, we can only speak for ourselves, and we're going to continue to model the kind of behavior that we think Canadians expect in terms of our own constituents and across the country. What as parliamentarians should be, we're going to continue to do the same as Elizabeth has done for her entire time here.
But Ms. May, how would you describe the tone? You've been in politics a long time. There's a lot of name calling. Probably to the extent we haven't seen. How would you describe the tone overall? Disrespectful,
unacceptably disrespectful. I recall when I was first elected, which May 2nd, 2011, Stephen Harper had just achieved a majority government. I do not recall one instance in question period, not once, when the Prime Minister was heckled. and certainly not so loudly that you couldn't hear what the Prime Minister had to say. There was more respect for the office and less of willingness to demonize an individual with ad hominem attacks. And this is on all sides. So we need to actually respect our constituents and do the work they sent us here to do. There are many key pieces of legislation. I will not want to go back to my constituents until Bill C-33 passes. Not one that I imagine you're thinking about, but it deals with anchorages and rail safety and port authorities. We also want to see the bill passed on First Nations sovereignty over their water, C-61. There are many pieces of legislation that have not advanced an inch since we resumed September 16th, and that does require, nous devons faire plus pour le travail que nous avons ensemble. Nous devons travailler en l'intérêt du bien-être public, et je pense que ce n'est pas trop d'exiger à mes collègues.
What about prorogation? Do you think that's possible?
I don't think that's possible, nor is it. When Stephen Harper prorogued Parliament, that was the first time in the British Commonwealth that a Governor General had allowed prorogation under such circumstances. They tried it once in Sri Lanka, and the Prime Minister was turned down. We forget in this country that there are principles to Westminster parliamentary democracy, and prorogation is not something that is used just to shut down a political embarrassment.
Speaking of being respectful, a new member, I think, wants to introduce themselves to you before we begin in there. So we'll leave space for that. Thank you all.
Thank you.